Hello, my name is Nicholas Jones, and today I'll be talking to you about a man named Jesse Ernest Wilkins Jr. As this movie Hidden Figures has come out, I've come to realize that there's a lot of African American mathematicians, male and female, that really have lost their place in the history books. It seems to be, of course, people from India, China, Greece, things like that. Europe, they're really the people who get the credit of things. A couple of semesters ago, I had to do an actual research project on Arlie Peters, and he was an African American mathematician. He worked for NASA, and he actually developed some things about black holes and things about astrophysics. And he was very interesting, but this semester I was tasked with doing, as I said, Jesse Ernest Wilkins Jr. Jesse Ernest Wilkins Jr. was actually born in Chicago, and he was born during the Great Depression. I believe it was in the 1930s. His father was an actual lawyer, and he actually started up a bar association in the county where Chicago is in Illinois. He later became a cabinet member on Eisenhower's actual administration, and he was one of the first African Americans to hold a sub-cabinet membership. Mr. Wilkins' mother was an actual teacher in the Chicago public school system. She actually received a master's degree, which is pretty impressive for that time frame, because if you're thinking the 20s or 30s, there wasn't many a time where school systems would actually, want to honor African American actual masters and or education. I'm assuming she must have got it in the late 1800s, early 1900s. His grandfather actually was a founder of one of the Methodist church in Illinois, so as you can see, he was born into a very devout Christian Methodist family. I think that with the actual benefit of having parents who are very successful in this time frame, he achieved and strived to great things. So when he was at the age of 13, he actually went into the University of Chicago, and after 4 years of being there, at the age of 17, he actually got his bachelor's of science in mathematics. That's pretty impressive compared to a person like myself, where I didn't get my bachelor's until I was 32, 33. And I know a lot of people who are even, teenagers this day and age, they're 18, 19, they don't get their bachelor's degree until 22, 23. After getting his actual bachelor's degree, he stayed at the University of Chicago, and 2 years later, he actually received his master's. Well, actually, no, a year later, he received his master's. 2 years later, he received his PhD from the actual University of Chicago. This is quite impressive in comparison to people that take 8, 9, years to do enough research to actually get a PhD. And here this man in, 1930 something, 1940, getting a PhD at the age of 19. Quite impressive. I kind of wanted to divulge for a second and say, that's very impressive under my understanding, because I knew when I was a kid that I was good at math, and I could do strange things like I worked at a job where I had to count people's registers, and I'd count the number of quarters, divide by 4, and move the decimal place. I would count the number of dimes, move the decimal place over 1. I would take the nickels and I would count them and then divide by 2 and move the decimal place. So I've always had this mathematical inclination, but I couldn't even imagine getting a bachelor's degree at the age of 17, or a master's at 18, or a PhD at 19. That is quite impressive. That's crazy. After that, he stayed at that university, and he actually started doing more research. For his dissertation, he actually wrote a book on geometry, and I believe it was on the calculus or the analytics of actual geometry. So his dissertation was written on multiple integral problems and parametric form of the calculus of variations. nice long thing for, he basically did something with geometry and tried to parameterize something from actual geometry and do equations for it in calculus. After that, he actually went to Princeton on a scholarship, which is very impressive compared to a lot of people never get a scholarship and or go to Princeton. And with this Rosenwald scholarship, he started doing research, and he actually wrote a couple more books. One was called The First Conical Pencil, and a special class of surfaces and projective differential geometry. You can see this is kind of funny because he's writing a lot of papers about geometry and space, but he's writing them on calculus and differential equations. Kind of interesting compared to some of the things that I've been learning through my actual years at Elizabeth City State University, where I've learned differential equations, I've taken geometry, I'm taking vector calculus now, and to think of, somebody thinking in the space of things in 3D and geometry, how do I write a differential equation about this stuff? That's pretty impressive. After that, and those were actually printed in the Duke Mathematical Journal in 1943. Yes. In the first one, it was written about geometric definitions for lines through a point on a non-ruled surface. The second, he considers a certain class of surfaces, expresses characteristics of these properties, and then he tries to figure out the elements and the projections of them. So in linear algebra and in vector calculus, we are learning about projections and what that means compared to a line normal to it, I believe. At one point in time, though, he did get a Master's in Mechanical Engineering in 1960. He got a Bachelor's in Mechanical Engineering in 1942. Those were both from New York University. After that, he kind of wanted to know, well, what am I going to do now? I've gone to University of Chicago. I've gone to Princeton. What's the next step? What should I do? He decided that he was going to attempt to go into the University of Chicago again for a research position. They denied him. And then because of that, he ended up finding the position to teach at the Tuskegee Institute, and he taught in mathematics, and he actually made them make a graduate program there, and it was the first of its kind. That's pretty impressive too, because not only is he teaching himself things and making big, strides in mathematics himself, he's going to an institute that was all African American or all black people, and actually making them have extra studies like graduate studies, persisting in the education of other African Americans and making the furtherment of other people's education. And that's commendable too, because you can learn all you want, but if you're not also a person who's helping others, that's kind of wasted in a way. Okay, after that, going to Tuskegee, he then wrote more papers. And in 1944, some of the papers he wrote was on the growth of solutions of linear differential equations, which in ODE, or ordinary differential equations, we kind of learned a little bit about linear differential equations. Definitely self-conjugate adjoint integral equations. These big long titles of things, multiple integral problems in parametric form in the calculus of variations, and multiple integral problems in... Oh, I just read that one. I'm sorry. And a note on skewness or kurtosis. And the last one, of course, was about some statistics, something that, a lot of mathematicians do not want to have to deal with. I know I'm one of them that kind of deters from any of that stuff. All right. And let's see, he actually had some on, in the next year, he wrote one called The Differential Difference Equation for Epidemics, and that was in the Bulletin of Mathematical Biophysics. Finally, in 1944 and 1946, he returned back to his alma mater, to the University of Chicago, where he served first as associate mathematical physicist and then as a physicist in a metallurgical laboratory. And guess what this was? This was part of the Manhattan Project. We all know that is that project where they created the first atomic bomb, the one that they dropped on Hiroshima. So to be able to say not only are you a record-breaking and, astounding African-American mathematician, but to also be able to say you are part of history of the first atomic bomb, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty surprising to even have read about this man. I was not expecting when I started to research this guy that Ernest Wilkins Jr., was part of the actual Manhattan Project and the first atomic bomb. And that means that he had to have known some things about physics and chemistry and how that works. And since plutonium-235, I think it was, 239, this was the first time they were using it to actually have fission happen and blow something up. It's impressive, The math of that and the equations had to be pretty impressive, pretty crazy. And at that point in time, that was the only lab that was actually doing something like that, messing with, plutonium-239. He was working under the direction of Holly Compton and Enrico Fermi. He researched the extraction of fissionable nuclear materials, such as the plutonium-239 that I was talking about. And he wasn't really told about the actual ultimate goal of blowing something up until the very end. He thought he was just researching plutonium and kind of, being on the cutting edge of something to do with fission. He actually was the co-discoverer at that time of a number of phenomena in physics, such as the Wilkins effect. So not only did he make strides in actual math, he made strides in physics. In the Wigner, Wilkins, and Wilkins spectra, which I didn't really see too much about it when I was researching him, but basically he made strides in math and physics. After that endeavor, he decided he was going to transfer to they told him he should transfer to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which was called Lab X at the time. Unfortunately, because of Jim Crow laws and it being in Tennessee, the government tried to deny him. So one of his actual mentors or his bosses wrote him a letter, and this man's name was Edward Teller, and he basically told them he had the credentials and the knowledge to do it, and that why would you deny someone who has the skills, that he thought that they were looking for someone with those skills. So he got the job because of that. So a nice stride in history, too, to see something change like that, because, with this Hidden Figures movie I was talking about in the first part, you're looking at someone breaking strides in NASA, and here's this man in the 40s breaking strides in, 40s and 50s, but breaking strides in actually, Jim Crow laws in Tennessee. And the Oak Ridge National Laboratory is still around today. He then continued to teach mathematics, and he did research in neutron absorption with physicist Eugene Wigner, so he never, lost touch with Wigner for quite a few years. He ended up designing nuclear reactors for energy for companies, and he actually has stake in that company, which Ernest J. Wilkins Jr. is dead now, but at that point in time, after figuring out how to make a nuclear reactor and make them for electrical power generation, he became part owner of a company. So I'm certain his relatives are still, part of that company, which is pretty cool. From 1946 to 1950, he left the labs and he went to New York to work as a mathematician for the American Optical Company. At that point in time, he met his wife, Gloria Stewart, and in 1947, then they had two children after the fact, Sharon and J. Ernest III. From 1950 to 1965, he worked as a senior mathematician at the United Nuclear Corporation in White Plains, New York. And then he became the manager for the mathematics and physics department there in 1955, and later he was the manager of the research and development of the Nuclear Development Corporation. In 1957, as I said, he obtained his BME, or his Bachelor's of Mechanical Engineering. Then in 1960, he got the Master's in that in New York University. From 1960 to 1970, he was Assistant Chairman of Theoretical Physics, Department Assistant Director of the Atomic Division of General Dynamics Corporation. That was from 1960 to 1965. In 1970, Dr. Wilkins was appointed a Distinguished Professor of Applied Mathematical Physics at Howard University, and he also founded the university's new PhD, or doctorate program, in mathematics. During his tenure at Howard, though, he undertook a sabbatical as a visiting scientist at Argonne National Laboratory from 1976 to 1977, which you must have liked because that's in Chicago, or close to it. And one good thing about the whole Howard thing is that we all know Howard is an HBCU, or historically black college or university. And since I go to a HBCU, that was an awesome tie to this man also, that, Elizabeth City State University is a HBCU, and he went to Howard and made them have a doctorate program. That's fantastic on his part. He was a past president in 1974 of the American Nuclear Society. One of his major achievements has been the development of radiation shielding against gamma radiation, which is emitted during electron decay of the sun and other nuclear sources. He developed mathematical models or equations for the amount of gamma radiation absorbed by a given material and a way to actually calculate it. The technique was actually of calculating radiative absorption. It's widely used among researchers now, and places like NASA and other space and nuclear science projects. In 1976, Wilkins was inducted into the National Academy of Engineering. Then from 1990, he lived in Atlanta, and he was a professor of applied mathematics and mathematical physics at Clark University, or Clark Atlanta University. Then finally he retired again, and that was in the last time in 2003. He passed away on May 1st of 2011, and at that point in time he was living in Fountain Hills, Arizona. I believe that actually, that left us with a big hole, because I thought other people like Euclid or Pythagoras or Fermat or somebody like that would be my mathematical hero, or somebody that would be big. But I kind of think that Ernest J. Wilkins is a hero of math in his own, because he pretty much showed you no matter who in the world you are, you can achieve great things and you can do all kinds of stuff. One thing I wanted to kind of end with was that, unfortunately, I'm talking about all this greatness that he did, but I'm leaving out one major part. We are talking about an African-American mathematician in the 1940s, 1950s, and 60s. We all know that during this time civil rights was going on. So even though he's one of the greatest black mathematicians, and he wrote 100 and some papers and did things in nuclear engineering and all this, he also, unfortunately, was the victim of racial discrimination. The American Mathematical Society, whom we all know and love because there's the MAA, the Mathematical Association of America, and American Mathematical Society, in his life, they actually, in 1947, discriminated against him. In a all-white actual conference they were going to have, they wrote him and said that he should come, and that they would accommodate him with a lovely colored family that he could have dinner with. And the University of Georgia was part of this too, and it's just ridiculous that this man who's giving so much to your cause and all of your studies and your actual field, that instead of saying, we think you're good enough to be in our area and with us and staying in the same place and having dinners with us, oh yeah, we found you a nice colored family to go live with and to have dinner with. We don't even want to be in the same room or eat dinner with you, but we do want you to come and speak at our actual, get together. We want you to come to this ball or this actual meeting and speak, but not be good enough to stay with us. It's really a shame because, he deserved better than that. And for the whole rest of his career and his life, he never had anything to do with the American Mathematical Society. And I really cannot blame him. It was a horrible move on their part, and it's kind of deplorable to think that there was a time frame like that. We had an actual speaker at my school not too long ago for STEM Week, and he actually worked at, I think it was a biological mathematics research lab in Tennessee, and for the life of me right now I cannot remember the name of it, but he was an African American man, and he actually was talking to some of the students because most of my school is, African American students, and he was telling them they shouldn't, let anybody tell them one way or the other, and that they should get their PhD just for the bragging rights in a way, and to show someone that, like, I'm just as good as you are, and I cannot be denied the rights or the facts of this. And it's just a shame because, as a white man, I don't sometimes think about these things. I do because I go to HBCU and I understand the plight that they have to go through because people are still back-rooted in old idealism. But it's just a shame, Maybe one day we will have people like Ernest Wilkins Jr. who will transcend and rise above, and then eventually we will come to a point in time where it's an even keel. But in mathematics and STEM degrees and things like that in STEM fields, it's a lot of time that women and African American and minorities are discriminated against, or they're just not able to be represented because they don't have the doorways, or it's just a shame. Well, in conclusion, as I said, Ernest Wilkins Jr. was a great man, and he was surprisingly studious. He did a lot of things in his lifetime, and he transcended a lot of bounds. And he may be my new math hero, or at least one of them. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it, and I hope that you will go out and research Ernest Wilkins Jr. too, and learn all about him. Thank you very much. You have a good day.